So it's February in the garden, and in February in most British gardens there's not always a huge amount to get excited about. It's not always a huge amount to do, but one of the jobs that is always done this time of year, and I always look forward to it, is the cutting back of your ornamental grasses. Ornamental grasses have been for quite some time now my favourite type of plant to work with. They're so useful, they're so versatile, and they add so much to the garden, and they don't want a lot in return. And this time of year, February, as I said, is when you need to think about cutting back a lot of your deciduous grasses. Not your evergreens, your deciduous grasses. We've got lots of different types in here. We've got some quite established clumps. This one here, which I'll be showing you how to divide in a little while. In terms of how you cut them back, I kind of work with 3 different options, and it's dependent on how many you've got, the space that you've got around you, and the time that you've got as well. So we'll have a look at some of those. So the first method, your rubbish bag there for cutting them back, is just by hand with a normal pair of secateurs. I tend to use secateurs on smaller clumps of grasses like this. Sometimes it's just easier that way. And what I tend to do is, because you've got a lot of stems here, grab a large handful, make a few cuts, and chuck it in your rubbish bag. And work through it like that. Another option which you can use, again with smaller grasses more, is by using a hand scythe, so a circular scythe. If it's very, very sharp, and it needs to be sharp, and again, just grab a handful of the grass and move the scythe through it. Watching your fingers, of course. The only downside with that one that I find is if your scythe is in any way blunt, then if you're drawing it through, sometimes it can actually lift the grass out of the ground. Some grasses have got very big tough rootstocks on. Others, like your pennisetums, some of the carex and some of the steeper varieties, are actually quite shallow rooted. So the act of pulling the scythe through, if it's not totally sharp, can sometimes actually lift it out of the ground. So it's a method, but not always the best way. So the final and most time efficient way of cutting back your ornamental grasses, especially the bigger ones where they've got thicker stems, is just by using a hedge cutter and cutting them low down, and you'll cut through a whole clump in seconds. You've got a bit more cleaning up to do afterwards, but if you're doing a lot like here, cutting them at the base with a hedge cutter is the quickest way of doing it. Now, depending on what you want from your garden, or what your client wants from your garden, there's a couple of different methods. If you've got a big border and you like things maybe a bit more on the wild side, and you're not worried about being too prissy and clean and perfection and all that stuff, which is good, you can hedge cut the grasses down bit by bit in sort of 4-6 inch chunks, and then just leave the debris on the ground, and it will naturally rot down as it would in the wild. So if you're that sort of mindset, do that. That way you can get the grass chopped down in seconds and you haven't got to clear it up. Okay, so what we're going to look at now, just to finish off, this is Miscanthus grass. This is Miscanthus sinensis morning light, which is tall grass. You can see it's about 6-7 foot high in places, with kind of like grey green foliage. This is quite an established clump now. This has been here for probably 5-6 years maybe, and we need to divide it today. And we need to divide it today because we've got a little conifer hedge here and it's just getting too big and too dominant for that space. So we're going to look at dividing that one today. Right, so here's our grass, all nice and cut down. If we stand over it, you can see the size of it there. Compared to my foot, it's about 2 foot across. So we're going to lift this up and we'll look to split it probably into quarters and get 4 smaller clumps out of that. You could divide it into thirds if you wanted, entirely up to you, or even half, but we'll probably go for quarters on this one. A good lot of movement on there from the root ball, which tells us that it's going to lift up fairly easily. There we go. So it's not at the moment too difficult. If this clump was a lot bigger, then it would be harder work, and you might have to split it down the middle of the ground, but for the moment we're looking alright. It can be pretty tough with these. You have to come on the other side. Squeeze in between this fence post. Whenever you're dividing big clumps of stuff, be it grass or herbaceous perennials, you need to be pretty ruthless with your spade. You can't tickle these things and hope that they'll come apart. You need to be firm and sharp and just hit through it, really. And you see now that that's starting to prise apart. To be well. It's coming apart nicely. Over halfway. And there we go. That's him in half. I'll drag him out so you can see him better. So there you go. That's your grass. And you can see it's not very deep rooted at all. tough when you get to established clumps like this. You can see actually, you know, only just below the surface, you've got very thin, fibrous roots. But with Miscanthus particularly, they really anchor themselves in the ground. But it makes it easier for division. You're not trying to sever big roots. So we're going to hit this one in half. So then we've got 4 quarter clumps of good size in there. Let's pull that worm out the way. Steady it with my foot a little bit, mark where I want to hit it. I reckon this will break in two. And that's it. As easy as that. So this is what I've done, some of what I've done this morning. These clumps here. This is actually a pampas grass, Cortaderia, that I've taken down this morning. With pampas grass you can hit them really hard back. And here we've got a line of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they're grown here in particular because we've got a big yew hedge here, which is a dark green background. And the pampas grasses in a line when they're up and flowering give a nice contrast to the hedge. This was a monstrous pampas grass that I cut down every year. This is actually a good example of what happens to grasses and any herbaceous perennials as they grow bigger and bigger. In the middle of here is just, well, nothing now. This was one plant, and as it's grown bigger and bigger and bigger, the centre has started to, well, it has completely rotted out, and it's now only alive on the outside. That's just an example of what happens to some plants. So that was a pampas grass that we've taken down, and I've cut down other grasses all on the back there. They've been cut down this morning. But notice you got your carex here. Evergreen grasses I'm not cutting down at the moment. We'll do those late spring, summer, if I feel that they warrant it. This here is your, it's quite a common grass. This is Steepa tenuissima, which is used quite a lot. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but it's used quite a lot these days. It's one of the grasses you see available in garden centres. They don't have a huge selection in garden centres. It's getting better, but so grasses like this, which are evergreen, we'll cut down later on. So it's a good job for this time of year. And do use more grasses in your planting if you get the chance. They're very, very versatile, very, very low maintenance, and very, very useful, especially in a design perspective. They remind me a lot of myself, ornamental grasses. Very masculine, very robust, very tough, but graceful and dainty at the same time, which is not an easy combination of traits to get right, but they certainly manage it. And on that note, I'm off. So thank you for watching.